Did you ever like tap into those dreams, or was it just like too
No,
intense?
I was just like, mm-mm. Oh, Lord, don't let it
Mm-hmm.
be. Like, I don't know what this means, but this is scary, right? Too often, Black women are a mere afterthought in conversations around wellness, but not in this space. On this podcast, the dialogue is always centered around women like you. Welcome to the podcast, but more importantly, welcome to the tribe. Be well, sis. So I'm super excited to have you, Dr. Zann. As I was saying offline, the way that I came into like contact with you is you were doing your dissertation and you had like a quick survey, I guess, about like, was it postpartum period or I think the postpartum period.
Yeah, it was the entire
right?
perinatal period. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we had like a conversation and everything, and I like spilled my guts to you, and I was just like, after I got the call, I was like, maybe that was too much. Maybe I should have like reeled it in a little bit, but it's super dope just seeing just now you are, you've done your dissertation, you are Dr. Zann.
I'm a whole doctor.
Okay, yes, changing lives. You have a new business. Like, it's just incredible to see your growth, and I'm super happy to have you here. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here. I'm glad that you've been able to like see me through this journey.
Absolutely. So I'm super excited to have you here. So the way that I typically start the conversation is by asking folks, how are they PMS? So physically, mentally, and spiritually. Yeah. You can go as deep or not as you wish.
Yeah, I love that. That's like a good little acronym to remember. I'm going to keep that in mind. Physically, I'm a bit tired. My kid was up for maybe like an hour last night, and having that like broken up sleep. Can be can be challenging. So I'm a little bit tired this morning, but really excited to get some movement in later today. I think that mentally I'm feeling pretty good. I know that I'm going to be seeing a few like really loved community members today, and that sort of like, that is really beautiful food for my soul. So I think that is like really like keeping me going. And then spiritually, I love that addition to this check-in. I would say that spiritually, I am feeling open. I'm spiritually open right now. I think that I haven't been as engaged in some of my spiritual practices lately as I would want to be. And I am open to diving back in a little bit more because it really does support me in my mental health and my physical health, right? Like the spiritual piece kind of helps hold it all together. So I feel like I'm open. I'm open to getting back into some of my practices.
I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So I really want to talk about the mama space and what led you to start it.
I mean, it kind of starts with my dissertation, actually. I started researching. My dissertation was on the impacts of doula-assisted care on Black experiences of anti-Black racism in the perinatal period, which I'm sure lots of people know is one of the reasons for Black maternal mortality, right? And so I didn't even have a kid at that point. I wasn't sure if I wanted kids at that point, but I was like, if I do, this is my reality. My reality is that I'm like at risk for death, right? And so I wanted to better understand ways that I could essentially save myself from that. And so I did that research, and thank you again so much for being a part of it.
Of course.
And as I learned more, I started to realize that I wanted to be part of the solution. I wanted to not just save myself, but to help save others, like other Black folks who are going through this process, right? And so I kind of shifted my clinical focus to like solely perinatal work. So I started working with pregnant and postpartum folks. I kind of geared the rest of my clinical training towards that population. And then I worked at this lovely program. I'm going to shout them out at UCSF called Embrace. And they offered racially concordant care to Black families. And so it was all Black providers, all Black families getting perinatal care,
Wow.
prenatal groups, therapy, therapists working with OBs and midwives, lactation consultants, doulas, like all Black everything.
Wow.
And it was so wonderful. It was such a learning experience. I was kind of on and off with them for almost 4 years.
Mm-hmm. That's so cool.
And yeah, I feel like I learned so much there. And also working within a system, there's still limitations there, right? Like working
Mm-hmm.
within the hospital system.
Yep.
And so I kind of felt like it was ready, like I was ready and it was time to step out, branch out, and start my own business, my own practice. So that's what the Mama Space is. It's a perinatal mental health practice, primarily offering psychotherapy, some education and coaching, and then some other like more ancestral practices. And that's a way of bringing my own self, my own history, my own culture into the work that I do. So it's kind of like a little bit of each of those, but with the goal of supporting perinatal folks. And yes, primarily Black folks, but all perinatal folks.
I love that. When you were telling your story, like your journey, it reminded me of when I was pregnant with my second. I decided that I did not want to go the traditional route in terms of delivering in the hospital setting, even though that's how it ended up. So I was part of a birthing center. And what I found was I felt so isolated because the birthing center, the midwives and such were great. But I did feel very much other. They have lots of programming to like help us prepare for baby. And I didn't do any of these things with my first. So I'm like, you know what? Even though I'm already a mom, I still want to learn, do all the classes possible. And I just did not feel welcome. Not that I didn't feel welcome, but I didn't feel comfortable. The majority of the group was white and it was like in the more affluent side of town. So it was just like, okay, I have nothing in common with you guys. And I just wouldn't feel comfortable sharing what I was experiencing at the time, which was looking back, definitely like some anxiety and depression. Right.
Yeah.
So it's super important to have spaces where you are able to fully speak to whether it's your provider or just speak to the people who are in the same space as you, who are also in their, prenatal or perinatal journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, like you said, even if it's not the members of the group, having a provider that looks like you or has similar experiences to you, like I'm also queer and like working with queer birthing folks, right? Like that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When they say representation matters, like it's not empty. It's not empty at all. Like there's so much power in that. First of all, I've noticed the language that you use and I'm trying to be better at the language that I use. So thank you for being that example there. One of the things that I love about your website is that, like you mentioned, you not only offer like the mental health aspect in terms of like therapy, but you also offer like the cultural piece, which is really, really big and that can be lost whenever we're dealing with like, the traditional providers and things. So talk to me about your background and how you bring your culture into the Mama Space.
Yeah. So I am Congolese American. I was born in the United States, and both of my parents and most of my family were born in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I have had kind of like I was going to say tumultuous, but maybe like rocky relationship with my culture and my upbringing for a lot of reasons. I think growing up, I grew up in Orange County, and it is very, very white and very, very wealthy. And being, one of the only Black families in my area, it took a toll on me, right?
I get it.
Wanted to distance myself from my Blackness.
Get it.
I wanted to distance myself from my Congoleseness. There's a whole lot there, right?
Listen, I get it. Haitian American, and I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood too. I get it. Say less.
Understand. Yeah, and so it wasn't until like much later, actually, once I moved to Oakland after I graduated from college, that I like started to come into my Blackness and understand my Blackness a lot more. And then from there started to understand and really honor my Africanness also, and the ways that my Africanness and my Blackness, while different, have a lot of similarities and can coexist, and like figuring out ways for them to coexist. And so I started to lean into working with my ancestors more. It started off with dream work, honestly. In Congo, dreams are so significant. Dreams mean a lot. And so I grew up, paying a lot of attention to my dreams. And so it was not a difficult leap, right, to really focus on my dreams and really try to listen to what my dreams were telling me. And I was able to really, on the way that I would describe it, is like commune with my ancestors in my dream world. And it was a really beautiful experience. And I felt like for me, when I gave birth, my ancestors were very, very much present. It was a spiritual experience for me. And so I felt this like pull to bring that into the work that I do. Whether for me, like just having my ancestors alongside me as I am supporting and guiding these people through a really intense transition, or working with my patients and my clients to sort of like incorporate their ancestors, bring in their spiritual practices into the space. Some folks have never really done that before or didn't realize that it's something that could be incorporated into either a mental health practice or a perinatal practice. So I kind of like guide them and help them in doing it for the first time.
I love that. You know what I was thinking about? I can really relate to the importance of dreams, like in our culture. I read something several times that like the majority of the ancestry of Haitians is Congo as well as Benin. So there maybe that's...
Oh, really? Okay, hey, cousin.
Yes, right? So yes, dreams are a big, very, very big part of this like everyday life. Like I remember my grandmother, like she would say she wished her dreams like had made other people rich, but it was never a message for her. She always had messages for other people. But also I think about every time I was pregnant, my dreams got so intense. It was very scary. I'm like, what does this mean for like, what is growing inside of me? Like mine were always like, it was like an alien or something. And I would always be like so worried, like what's happening here?
Yeah. So, did you ever like tap into those dreams, or was it just like too intense?
I was just like, Lord, don't let it be. Like, I don't know what this means, but this is scary, right?
Yeah.
So I never revisited it. I just remember just being really scared. Like, I don't know what this means. And yeah.
It's interesting that you bring that up, though, because that's sort of one way that I help folks bring in sort of like their spirituality, their ancestral sort of practices into the perinatal space and into the mental health space is through their dreams, right? Helping and supporting them in better understanding the messages within their dreams, what their dreams are trying to tell them, building more like comfort or like spaciousness around the intensity of their dreams, especially in pregnancy. We have vivid dreams. That's a big part of pregnancy, the pregnant experience. And my belief is that part of that is because pregnancy and postpartum, these are such spiritual experiences, right? Like there is a portal that is being opened up, right? And you're bringing your baby through that portal. And so as you're pregnant, you have some access to something else, to the other side. So kind of helping my clients and guiding them in understanding what messages they're receiving from the other side.
I love that. I feel like there's like a transformation that happens, like even like in your mind, your perspective, like the neurons change with pregnancy. What has been your experience, or maybe even what is your advice to somebody who has not maybe ventured into mental health or into even spiritual practices, and now that they're either considering becoming a parent or they're in the process, what would be like a first step in, I guess, accessing that part of their lives or that part of themselves?
I mean, I would start by saying that the perinatal period and pregnancy in particular is usually like such a great time to start therapy, because people are probably the most motivated during that time, right? They're like thinking so much about their baby, the kind of parent they want to be, the kind of child that they want to raise. And they're so motivated to make whatever changes are necessary to be able to like realize that dream of theirs. So like I think that maybe a piece of advice that I would give is to honestly, this isn't going to sound sound professional, quote unquote, but I would say to like date around, date around when it comes to therapists.
Yes.
Some people think that like the therapist knows best. So even if I don't feel comfortable with the person that I've met, I need to stick it out because, you know, they're going to help me. And the most important piece of therapy, the one thing that contributes to change the most is the therapeutic relationship. So if you don't have a good relationship with your therapist, the change isn't going to happen.
True.
And just because you don't feel it with your therapist doesn't mean that they're a bad therapist. They're just not right for you.
For you. Yep.
So exactly. Like, I think it's so important for you to just date around a little bit, shop around. If you aren't feeling connected to one, it's okay to find someone else, because that's where the change is actually going to happen.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are afraid to make that change, but I think that it's really important.
Yeah, and I'm really happy that you said that, actually, because I was one of those people who did not realize that, yeah, I have autonomy. Yes, I have options. Like, let's explore these options.
Yep.
Even beyond the therapist, even if you are not aligned with your midwife or your gynecologist, your OB, it's okay. Like, shop around. Unfortunately, with those, like, the earlier the better, the sooner the better.
Right, right.
But yeah, it's really important. If something doesn't feel right, doesn't mean anything about you or about them per se. It's just that you guys aren't a match, and it's okay. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think a lot of times we talk about the importance of community, especially for like during that, you know, really important perinatal time. How can we be better community members to birthing people?
Yeah, that one is a big one because we hear so many people in postpartum say that their community didn't show up for them, right? Or they've lost friends in becoming a parent. And that is just, it's so sad and also so common. I think that one big way for people to support pregnant and postpartum folks is to be educated, get educated, right? Like, go to a childbirth education class, understand what your friend or community member is going through, especially if you haven't had kids or aren't going to have kids. It's so important for you to sort of like understand their experience, to be able to know how to support them. Because it can be hard when someone's in postpartum and they're getting texts that are like, how can I help?
Right. So, I don't know. I'm tired. I'm exhausted.
It, right. Exactly.
Right. Like, I don't know.
Right. Wouldn't you like much rather have someone say that like, I've learned these things in this class. I'm going to drop off these 3 items that I know that people need in postpartum, right? Like, you don't have to do any work. That is so helpful. Like, similar to going to a childbirth education class would be going to a newborn care class, right? Again, if you don't have kids or don't plan on having kids, haven't been around kids much, or have been around kids but not around newborns, right? Like, it's important to know and understand the simple thing, like how to change diapers, right? Like how to deal with breast milk, like how do you heat it up, right? Like how long can it stay in the fridge? How, like, importance around like baby sleep and naps and wake windows, things like that like I didn't want to have to teach my friends when I was like exhausted and early in postpartum, right? My friends were offering to help take care of the baby, and I'm like, but do you actually know how to take care of my baby? Like, right? Like, it would make it so much easier to accept the help that people are willing to give, right? If these folks are educated in taking care of a postpartum and a newborn baby. Yeah.
You know, and a lot of people I've been noticing and have been vocal about they're uncomfortable with newborns because they're so small and so fragile. But to your point, going to take one of these education classes will demystify it, and you'll become more comfortable being around newborns if that was the barrier.
Exactly. Yep.
So I found that during my postpartum period with my second child, even though it was a traumatic birth, my own healing physically was much better with my second compared to my first. The main difference here was that I had a doula, and my doula, she stuck around for like maybe 6 weeks after birth. So she would come over and just help. She'd make teas, and she did an herbal bath for me one time. She helped with like laundry. Like she was just there. She's like, whatever you need me to be, I will be that for you. She sat with me at one point because I was really sad. And then the other thing was that my mom was also around. So my mom, being a Haitian woman, like that first few months after pregnancy is like really important for, yes, the baby, but for mom. Cause she was like, no, she describes it as like, you have a hole in your body. You have to seal up the hole. So she was making sure.
Yes, mama.
Yes. She's like, you have to make sure that you are keeping your womb warm, and I'm going to give you foods and soups and things like that to make sure that, I facilitate that healing. So I want to talk a little bit about what are some of your like cultural practices that are like common in, Congolese culture in terms of that perinatal period for mama, not necessarily for baby.
Right. Yeah. It's so funny, like hearing some of the similarities between our cultures, right? Because my mom also stuck around for like the first 6 weeks postpartum. She's down in SoCal. I'm in the Bay Area, California, and she flew up and was with me the whole time. And I think that is one piece, like having. It's really the like maternal elders coming in and like really just like sitting in with you. A lot of people call it the sitting in period.
Yes.
Where they come in and sit in with you and take care of you. You don't lift a finger. Like I would wake up in the morning. Mom took my baby. She gave me my oatmeal. She gave me my medication that I needed. And she's like, go sleep. Right? Brought me baby when baby needed to be fed. And then I slept again. Right? I did not want for anything during that time. It was beautiful. And like similarly, she also gave me like warm meals in order to warm my womb, help with that healing process, right? That was essential. That was really important. But actually, recently, I had a conversation with her because, yes, those were just some of the practices that are common in Congo. But I was like really wondering, traditionally, like going back, further in older generations, what are some practices that she remembers or she's been told, have been passed down, that folks do in postpartum? And it's so wonderful to ask older generations about postpartum practices, really about anything. You learn so much. And she was telling me about something that she remembered being called a tukula ceremony. And she had very vague memories of it. She was like very young when she witnessed some of it, but she was like, yeah, the first few weeks of postpartum, kind of similar to what I experienced. So many, elder, usually women, would come over and care for the postpartum person. And she said that they would rub this like sort of like a red warming paste all over the person's body, a lot on the womb, and wrap up the person's stomach. To help warm their body, right? It was a very healing practice. And she's like, I wasn't sure what was in that tukula paste, but it was just warming. People felt so good afterwards, right?
Nice.
And so I've done my own research on it. There's a lot of like speculation around what was in that tukula powder. But I've started to like play around with and like really try to create my own version of that and try to incorporate that into postpartum healing ceremonies that I provide to folks. So a lot of folks kind of know of and practice the closing of the bones ceremony. And I take that and I sort of incorporate this like tukula portion into it. And so I create sort of my own warming paste. And I call in my ancestors to sort of like help guide me through it, to bless it, call in the ancestors of the folks that I'm serving and working with. And I kind of provide them with a closing of the bone ceremony that is guided by some of my ancestral practices. And I apply the tukula paste onto them. I warm their bodies and provide them with some of that healing.
So for those who don't know, what is the closing of the bone ceremony?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the closing of the bone ceremony is a beautiful, beautiful tradition and practice where in postpartum, usually it's like after the first 40 days. So like after like the first 6 weeks or so, but it could really happen at any point. It's when you feel ready to sort of energetically and spiritually close the chapter of pregnancy and birth, and like really truly enter into postpartum and parenting,
Mhm.
and also physically sort of like whole put some of the pieces of your body back together,
Mhm.
essentially, right? Like there's so many ways that your body has like stretched and moved around. Your
Yep.
organs have literally been moved up in your
Yep.
body, right? Your bones have been like made flexible and stretched, right? And so in the closing of the bone ceremony, it's really to kind of bring those parts of your body back together and like shift them back into alignment, into the
Mhm.
ways that they were settling before, or into their new spots, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
But it's like a way to bring um, closure in some ways to this,
Yeah.
pregnancy and childbirth period, and enter into postpartum.
Is it like physically the belly wrap?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's not just belly wrap. It's
Mhm.
so we have folks lay down on their back, usually on the ground or on
Mhm.
like a massage table or something. And
Mhm.
there are several different wraps actually, like wraps on the feet that we wrap
Oh.
up at the legs, then up in the pelvis and the stomach womb area, up at the shoulders and around the head. Um,
Oh.
and it feels almost as though you're in the womb yourself,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like you are very held and kind of enclosed.
In a cocoon.
Um, exactly, you're
Mhm.
cocooned.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like this beautiful, almost like rebirth sort of experience after you're let out,
Mhm.
because you're being, yeah, rebirthed into the
Mhm.
postpartum period. You're being rebirthed into this new identity as a
Mhm.
mother or a parent, right?
Mhm.
It's a truly beautiful experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds beautiful. For my postpartum, we did the my mom did like the wraps, and my
Mm-hmm.
doula as well, like
Mm-hmm.
yards and yards of fabric to like bind
Yes,
me.
yes.
And it really did help. Like I felt better because I didn't expect, especially with my first pregnancy, I didn't realize how I'd feel like lopsided on the inside.
Yes,
Like,
like loose.
yes, felt, and like I would
Mm-hmm.
even walk funny because I felt like my hips were all off, and it just
Mm-hmm.
feels so much better just having it all to compress again.
Yeah.
I kind of want to shift a little bit to speaking about the partners. So, how can our partners be involved? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna be specific here. Like, if our partner is like a male.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further and like say a cis male who
Mm-hmm.
does not have a uterus, right? Has
Mm-hmm.
not experienced
Experienced.
any of the
Yeah.
things that we've
Mm-hmm.
experienced, right? I think it's actually kind of similar to the advice that I have for community members. It's like getting them educated also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that doulas are really great resources for that,
Yeah.
because doulas aren't just there for the birthing person, they're there for the partners also.
Yeah.
So they help educate the partners, they help include them in the process, they help sort of like teach them how to best support their partners. They're just like such a beautiful and magical resource in that way.
Yeah.
I would say to partners, like, go to the appointments if you can, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you will learn so much. Your partner won't have to then come back and like relay all the information to you. You'll be
Yep.
right there and be able to ask your own questions.
Mm-hmm.
I find that a lot of folks feel like they can't ask questions, or they'll be made to feel like dumb or incompetent if
Mm-hmm.
they have like a quote unquote stupid question.
Mm-hmm.
But I encourage partners to ask questions. That's the only way that they're gonna learn,
True.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and it kind of also shows your partner that you are wanting to be involved and that you care, that you have these questions, right?
Yeah.
So I think that those are a few ways, but also I would say to be in community with other non-gestational parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like other dads,
Mm-hmm.
other people who haven't given birth but whose partners have.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, learn from them, be in community. It
Yeah.
will be super essential in the postpartum period also, because women and birthing folks aren't the only people that can have postpartum depression and postpartum
Yes.
anxiety, right?
Yes.
So can partners, so can
Yes.
men. And it's less talked about. And there's like a lot of shame and stigma around that.
Mm-hmm.
But to have a community of folks that you can actually be vulnerable with, who
Mm-hmm.
might actually understand the experience of what it's like to be the non-gestational parent bringing
Yep.
a baby into the world and like taking care of the house and taking care of your partner while they're healing and all of
Yep.
that on no sleep also,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That can be super, super helpful.
Yeah, I'm so happy you mentioned that, because we don't talk about that piece, because the same way or in a similar way that we are experiencing all the changes that a new life, a newborn brings, so are they. And they're also usually sleep deprived as well. You know, yes, we have the added piece of the hormonal fluctuations, but just the social, like, wow, I have a whole new responsibility that's really important that I really care about. And I'm just not sure I'm doing this right, you know?
Right.
They have the same.
Yeah. And I'll also add that like when someone goes through a birth trauma, their partners are going through a trauma also.
Yeah.
Like I personally, I had postpartum preeclampsia. I hemorrhaged during birth, and like talking to my partner about it weeks later, he had a hard time even talking about it with me because he's like, yeah, like you turned gray, like that was so scary for me to witness, right? And he needed people to be able to process that with like watching your partner almost die. And what does that mean? What does that look like for you? Yes, the trauma happened to me, but he was also traumatized by it.
For sure, for sure. Ooh, that makes me think about my delivery with my second. Essentially, I had placental abruption, so the placenta detached too early. And he wasn't sure because he knew I wanted so badly to have a non-medicated, don't go to the hospital, and him making a decision because I just was not coherent to call 911 and to say, no, we're going to the hospital because I'm not sure I can do this. Like he felt a way about it. Like he doubted himself up until like maybe like a year or two ago. Our kid's 5, about to be 6. He still felt away. I'm just like, no, you did the right thing. He had to work through that, and then working through how our son was when he was first born too. So yeah, to your point, I was the one who physically went through something, but yeah, he was traumatized in his own way. So I'm really happy you mentioned that for folks who are listening and can definitely relate, and maybe that's can open up a conversation with their partner. Yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
Sure. And I'm happy that you mentioned that it's important for them to also have their own communities. Stereotypically, like cisgendered males don't really have like in-depth communities. Like they may have friends that they might like watch sports or play sports with or just check in with, really superficial, but are they really talking about the heavy stuff, the real stuff? And
vulnerability is a hard thing for cis men especially. And I mean, that is a product of toxic masculinity, of the patriarchy, right? Yeah, like even men who really want to be vulnerable with other men have a hard time. There's like there's a barrier there, right? And so it creates a lot of loneliness for dads, especially. There's like, I've been reading so many articles about how there's like this pandemic of lonely, isolated dads right now. And this is one of the reasons, right? Because there's so much around men being vulnerable with each other. And so when dads meet up, it's like, oh, how are you? How are the kids? Oh, it's all good, like,
and keep
oh yeah, they didn't sleep last night, but it's all good,
Right.
And it's like, no. Let's actually be real about this, right? Like, actually, you might be able to understand each other in a way that you didn't realize.
Yeah. Ooh, so good. And also, they should also have their own therapist as well to help them learn how to be vulnerable and open up and express themselves and all of that. Super important. We all need a therapist, honestly,
Agreed.
Yeah. Life is complicated. I spend a lot of time on Reddit. So people Google, I Reddit. Okay.
Okay.
That's where I get my information. And there's this one Reddit that I would love to get your insight on. So because you are an expert on perinatal, like that period. So I want to get your expertise and your insight on this one
Okay.
here. So it says, am I the asshole? So just
Mm-hmm.
had my first baby a few weeks ago with hubby. Hubby just sat on his phone the whole time I was in labor. He cut the cord, but went right back to playing on his phone. I got a second-degree tear. I was up all night and did it all myself. We ended up staying longer than intended due to the baby's health. I wrote down who I wanted to see me like that and who I didn't want to. I let my husband know. He didn't advocate for me. I ended up with 4 people I felt uncomfortable with, and no one stood up for me. I had to have help getting hubby to and from work for a week. I appreciated it, but everyone kept saying I need to hurry and do it. I didn't mind, but I was in pain. So she had to take him to work.
Mm-hmm.
I was sore because I tore through muscle. Whew. I didn't want to drive anywhere but where necessary. So, for example, the doctors as well as to my husband's job or close by because my grandparents live less than 5 minutes away. So my husband told me that my sister-in-law said that I'm an abusive parent because I wouldn't let them see the baby, but let my family because they came to the hospital. We kept saying I don't feel well enough to drive that far. They're about 30 to 45 minutes away unless needed. Long story short, they're saying that they're abusive for not sharing the baby and spending time and traveling to go see the extended family who she's not that tight with. Right. So what are your thoughts on that, essentially?
Ooh, I mean, I feel sorry for this birthing person for so many reasons. I mean, going through any sort of a tear, a laceration, that is intense stuff. Tearing through muscle, that is painful. Yeah. The healing is painful. And then having to feel so alone in the experience, right? Like having a husband, a partner who is really not present, right?
Yeah,
on their phone, right?
Wild.
Like
yeah.
popping in to cut the umbilical cord and then popping back out.
Oh my gosh.
Not advocating for her, right? Like that can make the experience feel so lonely. And she's going to carry that with her for the rest of her life. Like this was her birth experience, right? It didn't have to be that way. I think that this is a classic example of the ways that being more educated and involved could have helped the situation, right? Like if the husband had, I don't know if he's gone to like all the prenatal appointments. I don't know what he did. I'm assuming no, right? Like he doesn't seem like the kind of person that would do that. But how different would the experience had been if he was able to have conversations with his wife and maybe a doula about how to best support her, about what her needs actually would be, about who she wants in the space and why, so that he can advocate for her because he understands the reasoning behind it, right? Even to understand about like what potentially could happen, like the potential of a tear and what it means and like what healing would look like, why it's actually difficult for someone to drive and sit down when they've had a tear like that, right? Like having that understanding ahead of time could have helped the situation. And it would have allowed them to talk a lot about their shared boundaries. You know, we hear boundaries being talked about a lot these days. And especially as birthing people, like we often are setting boundaries for ourselves and for our babies, right? But the boundaries shouldn't just be ours. I think that they should also be family boundaries that we kind of all hold together, especially when it comes to, you know, your partner's family, your in-laws, right? Like if you come as a united front where it's not just like, yeah, she doesn't want to see you, right? But it's more of really as a family, we have decided that we're going to wait X amount of days until we branch out and see more people. Or as a family, we're going to prioritize her healing because she just had a tear. And so we're not going to drive more than 10 minutes anywhere, right? Like being able to come at it as a united front can help not vilify the mom, right? In the situation, right? And calling her abusive, which is like, no, I'm not even going to get into that. That is wild. That's truly wild. Right? Like she became the villain in this when she's just trying to heal and trying to heal on her own because she has no support, right? Like as opposed to that happening, how can we come at it together as actual partners with shared boundaries? That's so important.
Oh, I love that. And I never considered the shared boundaries piece.
Mm-hmm.
Like in practice, it makes sense. But I
Mm-hmm.
never thought about the term that's associated with it. My thing is when it comes to in-laws, I always think that whoever's family it is should be the buffer and should be the one who communicates, and it should be from
Mm-hmm.
them. Like
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not your idea, be like, well, I feel this way,
Right.
just to
Mm-hmm.
shield your partner a bit, because
Yeah.
your family is going to more or less always love you, and they might disagree with you, but if it's an outsider, it might be a little different. So
Yeah. Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I think that even in that case, I might still advocate for a little bit more of that shared piece as opposed to like,
Hmm.
the husband going to his family and being like, this is my decision. Really like
True.
show your family that no, we are in this together. We are partners.
Yeah.
Like this is our decision. Right.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. So good. Thank you, Dr. Zann. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours. I
I
have so many
know.
other like questions and thoughts, and I don't want to take up your entire day.
I have loved this conversation
I
though.
appreciate you. So tell me, where can the people find you, and what type of support can you offer to families and to birthing folk?
Yeah, of course. So I offer perinatal psychotherapy within the state of California for really folks throughout the perinatal spectrum. So if you're trying to conceive, if you're dealing with fertility issues or a pregnancy or infant loss, all the
Mm-hmm.
way through like your postpartum dealing with anxiety or
Mm-hmm.
you're pregnant and you don't know how to handle any of the emotions that are coming up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I support folks within that period, within first psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
For my coaching and education, that's open to folks nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have coaching packages for childbirth and postpartum planning. So I'll do some education with you on like what to expect throughout childbirth, depending on where you choose to birth and
Mm-hmm.
who you choose to birth with, like midwife versus OB or both.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go through education on postpartum also. So kind of talking to you about what you might expect in postpartum within your body, within your psyche, with your community. And then we go through planning and preparation for it. So, yes, we create a birth plan, sure, but that's not the only plan that we create, right?
I love it.
We create a postpartum plan. We create like a letter to send to people in your community about what you'll need ahead of time, right? So that you're not left wondering where they are later on and they're
Yeah.
not left wondering, how can I help, right?
Yeah.
So we really prepare you and your community for what's to come. And then I do lactation education and planning. So that's very similar. We go through what your goals are for lactation, and then plan and prepare for that. What happens if you're not able to feed in the way that you want to? What are
Mm-hmm.
your other options?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if your baby's in the NICU? How will you want them to be fed? What
Mm-hmm.
happens if for whatever reason you need more care and are unable to be with your baby immediately
Mm-hmm.
after birth? How do you want them to be fed, right? So those are the things that I work with folks with in my like education and coaching packages. And like I said, that's available nationwide.
That's
So
dope.
yeah.
That's
And
super
then of
dope.
course,
Mm-hmm.
folks who are locally can experience some of my more like ancestral practices, like the tukula ceremony that I talked about, and a blessing way ceremony that I call the kusakumuna ceremony, to prepare for birth. So those things are available in person locally. And so folks can find me on Instagram at its.themamaspace, or on my website at itsthemamaspace.com.
Super, super important. I love how you create a plan for after the birth, because we
Mm-hmm.
know about the birth plans. Yes, I want this
Mm-hmm.
and I want that while in labor and delivery. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense because that's a finite time. The after portion is much longer, and I
Yeah.
think having a plan
Yes.
is so impactful. So super,
Listen,
super
birth
incredible.
is a moment, but postpartum is forever.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Dr. Zann.
Of course, of course.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Be Well Sis. If you'd like to get in touch with us, there's a link in the show notes. Be Well Sis is hosted by me, Dr. Cassandra Dunbar, and produced by Edit Audio. Don't forget to hit follow so you never miss an episode. Until next time, be well, sis.